Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello, could I please speak with Claudia Rankine? Is this Claudia Rankine?
Yes, it is. How are you?
I am very well. I'm so pleased, Claudia, that you're part of these quarantine tapes. I really am delighted that you accepted this call. Thank you so much. Tell me, Claudia, how have you been living these past 4 months of what we might call a quarantine time?
Well, in some ways, it's not been so bad, to be honest. I haven't traveled, so I've been home with my family, which is rare to have consecutive weeks at home. So that's been nice. And we're lucky enough to live in the part of New Haven where there are lots of trees and hikes, so we can get out.
So, speaking to many writers recently, they have often said what everybody's living through is our life as it is usual, but of course with an incredible difference. Because,
exactly.
Because you spend so much time alone, so much time writing. I think the difference might be that you have time now, as you said, with your family, which can be wonderful, and for some people it can be detrimental.
For us, in our case, it has been wonderful. My daughter is at the age now where the world is more interesting than we are. So,
how old? That's funny.
She's 17. So
right.
I feel like I've been given a gift to actually be able to have meals with her and sit down and talk to her about what's going on in the world. So. And a lot is going on in the world, so it's been really an interesting 4 months from that perspective.
Has it been hard to talk with her about what's going on in the world?
Well, oddly no, because these kinds of conversations, perhaps not COVID, but the issues of precarity in the society, racism. Police brutality, anti-Black racism specifically, all of those things we discuss on a normal, over the years. So she's sort of used to that.
And I was particularly, forgive me, I feel like I interrupted you. Please continue. Sorry.
No. But I mean, but there is an underlying unsteadiness about what's happening and how much at risk we are to the virus and what she can and cannot do and how that affects her parents, me and her father, in the household. So those kinds of discussions are new.
I was so struck to read about your forthcoming book, Just Us, an American Conversation. And I was really interested, well, you know how interested I am in conversation. I think we're having one now, but why a conversation? Why that subtitle, as it were, which is really part of the title, it feels.
Yes, I think that we are at an impasse in this country. People don't know how to speak to each other. They don't know what the other person doesn't know. It's amazing how we have gotten this far with a kind of segregated mentality around simply speaking to each other and speaking about certain subjects. And so I wanted to write a book that looked at what it means to talk about race in the United States. And so I took actual conversations that I've had in the real world and brought them to a shrink and asked the shrink, why did I say the things I said? And why did this person say the things they said to me, like how are we functioning beyond the surface, or beneath the surface? What might have pushed me to be irritated? And after I discussed the conversation with the shrink, I wrote it out and I gave it to a fact checker, and I asked the fact checker to tell us sort of where I was making statements or presumptions that were not based on actual fact, or where the other person might be doing the same. And so he came back with the actual historical facts. And so those were put into the conversation. And then I would give the conversation back to the person, if it were you that I had the conversation with, and say, is this the conversation we had? And do you have anything to add?
How about subtract?
Or subtract? Well, if you said, no, this is not the conversation, then I would change it. But nobody ever said that. Everybody said, yes, this is the conversation we had. These are the things I said, but this is not what I meant. And then they would write me something to explain what they meant.
This is a methodology you've used over time. I remember when we last spoke during Hurricane Katrina, as I recall, you recorded CNN coverage of the storm. And in a way, you're continuing this in this new book. But what do you think is behind that impulse? And I must say, I'm Claudia. I'm particularly taken by the notion that you took that to someone who looks at the ground floor of the house, or maybe the basement, or maybe the cellar of the house, namely a shrink.
Well, I wanted to know, because these conversations often are heated, they have a lot of feelings that come up. And is it just the moment? Is it just you calling somebody white that makes everybody so angry? Or is there more to it than that, And so I really wanted a professional person's opinion on that. Because even now, during the quarantine, we have people who, when they're asked to put on a mask, they go crazy. They start, yelling racist slurs at people, pointing guns at them. And as much as I can just say, oh, those people are racist, I feel like there's more to it than that. In fact, you're answering my question by saying there's more to it. And this anger that we see, we see it all the time, right? Every single day we see angry people going into stores, being told to put on a mask, and them screaming at the essential workers, right, as they are now called. And I'm curious what you make of that. I had a conversation on the Quarantine Tapes with a colleague of yours, Greg Grandin, who believes that in some way people have misunderstood their rights. But I'm wondering what you make of that moment of what one might call hyper-individualism. Well, I think that's the language to talk about it, but I feel like the rage is even beyond that. I think I think we are in a society without a leader. We are surrounded by the threat of a virus that has, many people have succumbed to it. And so people, I think, are really on the edge in terms of anxiety, depression, isolation, their own sense of, we have no idea what their sense of precarity is relative to economic, or, what are they able to pay their rents? Are they worried about mortgage? Are they whatever? We have no idea. So they're living in a very precarious and tenuous way. And then the minute somebody asks them to do something they have been told by our president not to do, they go berserk. And so he's politicized a kind of emotional precariousness, and then given them the language of rights. I have the right not to do this. But I think the emotions are so deep that they must be coming from a more complex place.
And translating those emotions into a different reality is really what now matters so much. I was so taken, Claudia, by the poem that was featured on the front page of the New York Times book section on Sunday about a month ago, called Weather. And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to ask Claudia Rankine actually to read it? It was so impressive to see it there on the front page without commentary. So perhaps you could read it and offer some commentary either before or after.
Sure. On a scrap of paper in the archive is written, "I have forgotten my umbrella. Turns out in a pandemic, everyone, not just the philosopher, is without. We scramble in the drought of information, held back by inside traders, drop by drop, face covering. No, yes, social distancing, 6 feet under for underlying conditions, black. Just us and the blues, kneeling on a neck with the full weight of a man in blue, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. In extremis, I can't breathe, gives way to asphyxiation, to giving up this world, and then mama, a call to protest, fire, glass, say their names. White silence equals violence, the violence of again, a militarized police force tear gassing, bullets ricochet, the civil unrest, taking it, burning it down, whatever. Contracts keep us social, compel us now to disorder the disorder. Peace, we're out to repair the future. There's an umbrella by the door, not for yesterday, but for the weather that's here. I say weather, but I mean a form of governing that deals out death and names it living. I say weather, but I mean a November that won't be held off. This time, nothing, no one forgotten. We are here for the storm that's storming because what's taken matters.
Tell me.
So, that scrap of paper in the archive is actually Nietzsche's.
Yeah.
And
about the umbrella. It's Nietzsche, and then there's a wonderful line that Walter Benjamin quotes of a letter of Proust, where Proust says, "Dear Madame, I forgot my umbrella. I'm bringing a someone to pick it up." And then in that same letter he says, "Dear Madame, I found my umbrella." But tell me, it's Nietzsche.
Derrida has written about that line as a way of thinking about forgetting about your body, forgetting about your own needs. But I wanted this idea of will to power, like whose will to power will be the governing force at the end of the day, and then the poem just unfolds from COVID into Floyd's murder, because it did just sort of do that. We were sort of brought home, and the questions around the virus were everywhere. Should we wear masks? Should we not? And we have, the kind of buffoonery of an administration that is confused about whether or not it should be protecting its citizens or running for election. And so constantly stepping forward, moving back, not understanding what is truth. What is truth? It has made truth a kind of a thing that is movable. And then Floyd is killed by the police, which is not news in the sense that Black men and women have been unjustifiably killed by the police for as long as I have been alive. But there was something very, very gruesome about watching the calm with which this man just kept his knee on an unresisting person who is actually asking for help. And because it was videotaped, I think we all got to see it in a way that was not paused, because normally we're running here, we're going there, we're flying here, we're in airports, we're in taxis, we're walking, we have a meeting, and so you get a glimpse. But now everybody was home, so when it appeared, it appeared, and you could take it in. You could actually take it in and understand the horror, the sustained systemic horror of how Black people are treated in this country by the police, and how the justice system has propped that up. I mean, the police couldn't do what they do if the justice system, if the judges didn't support them, if the prosecutors didn't support them. And, so the police is just the first face of the systemic destruction aimed at people of color, specifically anti-Black racism. So anyway, the poem kind of falls out through that and down through that, and some of the statements that have been in the protests say their names and white silence equals violence. People were carrying around those signs, and we know that the protesters were tear gassed and shot at, and people took it. That one of the most amazing things about what has happened in the last few months is that we saw an American public show up and said, we are not going to take this anymore. Mm. And it was everybody. Mm. This was not young people or old people or white people or Black people. It was everybody. It was American citizens. It was Americans. And then a European and international response in solidarity, which was humbling.
Humbling, humbling, and in some way perhaps encouraging.
And encouraging, humbling and encouraging. I mean, humbling in that I have been waiting a lifetime for people to say a life is worth something, not a Black life or a white life or an Asian life or a Latinx. A life is worth something. And finally, people stood up and said, "Yes, no, this is outrageous."
But I came across again in preparing to speak with you, Claudia, that piece you wrote maybe 5 years ago in the New York Times, called "The Condition of Black Life is One of Mourning," where you say when Blacks become overwhelmed by our culture's disorder and protest, ultimately to our own detriment, because protest gives the police justification to militarize as they did in Ferguson. The wrong-headed question that is asked is, what kind of savages are we, rather than what kind of country do we live in? In a way, perhaps you would modify now, with the help of your shrink, the word detriment. Maybe it's not at their detriment now. Maybe this kind of civil disobedience that is happening now and protest is a sign of a possible change, or that there's a shard of hope in it.
Well, I think so, but I think it's because of the collective action that we're seeing now, which is unprecedented. I mean, we have not seen this before, which is not to say that individuals haven't shown up during the civil rights period or during, but not this sort of, suburban white moms saying, this is not the America we want. Those women, I have not seen them in my lifetime. I saw them come out for Me Too, but I did not see them show up for a change in how policing works in this country, how justice is metered out in this country. And that is new. That is their, kids, adults, parents, children. This is new. This is a new day. And I think in some ways the brokenness of the executive branch is allowing people to see just how corrupt.
It's helpful in a strange way. And I'm wondering, in that same piece, you quote that amazing line of Lorraine Hansberry, where you say the problem is we have to find some way with these dialogues to show and to encourage the white liberal to stop being a liberal and become an American radical. And
exactly.
And maybe Lorraine Hansberry is being heard now.
Yes. No, I think I think that's, people brought themselves out on the street when the government got militarized force. I saw police and representatives of, I don't know, I'm not even sure if they were police, if they were military, I don't know who they were, in D.C., pick up protesters and talk them. So people were risking their lives. Yeah. This was not a walk in the park with a placard. People were out there risking their lives with armed, angry police who are probably now lynching people all over this country, and we don't even know it. We've heard of a couple of lynchings here and there, and supposedly some suicides. But, you've got to wonder where the rage of the police will go. And I'm sure people are continuing to be killed. So the people who went out were very brave, because they knew they were not going to get the support of this president or, So I think that was a radical action, and not only did it happen one day, it sustained itself over months. So that was an incredible moment in American history.
Coming back to what I'd say is Claudia Rankine as a collector, nearly as a Benjaminian collector, collecting scraps that later on will be helpful perhaps to you, recording conversations that are truthful and that are spoken by people, and then checking with them to see if they might have said that, and improving on what they might have said, or leaving it as you said. You once said working on a piece is like playing chess. You're moving the language around to say to somebody, yes, I know you're possibly thinking this. I know this is possible. This is a possible move for you. I'm going to include it here so you don't think that I haven't been listening. I'd love you to say a little bit more about that process, which is so interesting, and perhaps even in the context both of your forthcoming book and the present moment, because I feel like your forthcoming book, I imagine, will include this present reckoning.
Oh, well, no, the book is out in a month, so it stops before all that has happened. But it does ask the same questions that we are asking now. And it was exactly that. I wanted the conversation to be just that, to be one person to another, even though what we're talking about is systemic institutional violence. I mean, it's in there. But who makes up the institutions are people.
Yeah.
And so unless the people begin to recognize who they are and what their investments are and how much they're invested in whiteness, and not just white people are invested in whiteness, other people are invested in whiteness. We have a lot of people who grew up in a system, in a society where the things that are valued are named in service of white supremacy. Just silly things like blonde hair, for example.
Right.
You have an entire Republican Party dyeing their hair blonde to signify. I mean, you see when you look at the convention, from the images of the convention from 4 years ago, people were wearing blonde wigs if they weren't blonde themselves, if they hadn't already dyed their hair blonde. Yeah. And you have some very, very Black performers having blonde hair because it makes them more marketable. And so it's really about how can we begin to look at this society and talk about what's valued in it in order to see what's not valued. And
That's
when and I think until you can do that, until you can name the things that are valued, you won't be able to understand what isn't valued.
Is that in part what your center at Yale is trying to do?
The Racial Imaginary Institute.
Yeah.
It's not actually at Yale. It's in New York, and the collective that forms it are mostly located in New York, because we wanted it to be available to a larger community than just the Yale community. And yes, the mission was to make apparent the things that were not talked about in terms of race. One example now, and we see the president doing this again and again, the insistence on the virus as the China virus. What is that?
What do you think it is?
It's an attempt to distance whiteness from and responsibility from the violence, from the violence of the virus, and to blame and to create blame around it. This is a pandemic that has affected every country in the world, and yet. So race plays. Race is an important weapon. It's weaponized, and no other president has done it as overtly.
Systematically.
They've all, but none has done it as overtly as the present administration.
Claudia, what a note to leave you on. But there was also in this conversation, there was also your wonderful laughter, for which I'm very grateful.
And it's lovely to talk to you.
It's really wonderful. It's really wonderful to talk to you, and stay safe. I hope you stay close to your daughter. She might discover that, she wants to spend more time with you. Strange things have happened. Stranger things have happened. No. All the best.
Well, maybe she'll go with me to vote. That will be nice in November.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. I did that with my older son just a few months ago, and it was extraordinary. It was the first time he could vote. So let's keep the fight on. And thank you so much, Claudia. Take good care of yourself, and thank you for taking this call.
Oh, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.